Hey guys, how's it going? BACKSPACE Cadet here. Welcome to the tutorial. Today we're going to be going over top-down jumping. Some may know this as working with the Z-axis, others may refer to this as 2.5D movement. It's all the same. We're going to be going over that today. I've scoured the internet and I haven't found a whole lot of useful information on this specific subject. In fact, about a year ago, I was working on a project that I'm no longer working on where I needed to use the Z-axis for a similar method of top-down jumping, and there was hardly anything that I could find. I found a few things on the Game Maker asset store, but like I said, you have to buy it, and it's extremely hard to find, so my goal today is to try and make this as simple as possible for those of you who are a little bit newer, or honestly, some of you veterans may not even be super familiar with how to do something like this. As a small side note, I have a new microphone, so be expecting some better audio quality. But moving forward, I've already programmed all of this. This is a little bit more of an advanced one. I'm not quite at the skill set where I would be able to concentrate on talking and explaining while trying to program this from the ground up, so I'm just going to show you guys exactly what this top-down jumping looks like so far. Now, this little yellow block is our player. Up here in the top left-hand corner, we have our Z value. Now, the Z value is going to be the number that is at the base of our player, and then the Z floor is going to be the floor level below the player. So we have basic movement, and then if you notice, our Z is increasing when we jump, and then we can now notice how our Z floor is 16 because we're on top of a block that's 16 pixels tall, and then we can jump on top of those as well. Now in theory, you could actually add as many levels to this as you'd like. For this example, I only have 0, 16, and 32. So let's go ahead and jump into the meat of this. I'm not going to waste too much time. Essentially what we have here, we just have 5 sprites. So we have a sprite for the player, the shadow underneath, the ground level, which is more of a background, and then we have the 16 height and the 32 height block. Now for the objects, we have a non-static parent object. All that we have here is we are simply using the basic, updating the depth based upon the Y value. Now all of these objects here, the object player, and then all of the block parents, which these are also children of the block parent, these are all going to inherit this value. That basically just changes their order that they're drawn, so that whenever you are, whenever your player is behind one of the blocks, it's going to be drawn behind. Whenever it's in front, obviously it's going to be drawn in front. It's in front now, and it's behind. That's all that that's doing. Now, a very important note, if you're following along with this project, is the centering in the hitboxes. So I have essentially the way to imagine this, and this is a little bit complicated to explain. Imagine that the base of your player is only this square right here, because this is kind of a 3/4 perspective that we have going on. So we only want our collision mask to be at the base of all of these objects. This is just kind of giving the illusion of height. So if you'll notice, not that one, if you'll notice, see, it's only at the base, because that's all that we're colliding with. We're not colliding with this because this is technically higher, and it's more to create that visual illusion. If you'll see there, we're only colliding with that base. So that's very important with this project. You could, in theory, use physics movement and physics collisions with this, but for this specific example, I am opting out of using physics for simplicity's sake. So let's go ahead and look at what we have in the create event. Now I'm going to do my best to kind of break down and explain everything we have here. So in the object player, we're just setting all of these variables right here. So the speed, that's going to be your normal speed along the X and Y axis, just like in any top-down game. So you're basically moving 1 pixel per step. Now, this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. We're setting the Z variables. Now, to my understanding with GameMaker, there's the only mention of a Z-axis is in some of the 3D variables and things like that, but even then it's very scarce, and it doesn't. I'm a little bit unfamiliar with how the 3D Z-axis works, but all I know is that for this is technically a 2D game, even though it is moving along 3 different axes. So all we're doing here is we're just coming in and we're setting all of these manually. So the Z, like I said before, this is our player's Z position. The Z floor, that is going to change based on the height of whatever block is underneath you. So if you're on top of a 16 block, your Z floor is going to be 16. Now, Z speed, this is basically jump speed. So if you wanted to do, if you wanted to name this jump speed in your project, it's all the same. I just named mine Z speed. Now Z gravity, this is actually going to be changing every single step. Right now it's at 0. This is more of a downforce than it is gravity, but I just named it gravity for this specific example. And then Z jump is going to be a true or false variable here. So this is basically just if you are in the air, if you just hit the jump button, then this is going to do something later, which we will go into. Now this is where a lot of the bulk of the code is. For those of you who are newer, if this seems overwhelming, feel free to comment below and ask any questions you might have. I will respond to as many people as I can and try and help out as much as I can. So all we're doing here, we're inheriting the layering from the non-static parent. And now what we're doing here is if Z jump equals true, now let me first, whenever space is pressed, all that spacebar is doing is, so if we're on the ground, so if Z is less than or equal to Z floor, then Z jump equals true. All that Z jump is doing is it's coming here into the step event and it's triggering this. And your Z is adding your Z speed. So every step that jumping is true, it is adding 3 to your Z position. So you're going up by 3. Now coming down here, if you are not on top of the block, so if not instance place at your X and Y position, the O block pair, then we can logically conclude that means that your Z floor must be 0. And Z block, which is the background, must be underneath you. And if you are not on the ground, so if not Z is less than or equal to Z floor, so if you are higher than your Z floor, then your Z is being subtracted from each step, your Z gravity. And remember, it starts out at 0. So it subtracts 0, so it actually doesn't do anything, but then your Z gravity increases by 0.2. So each step that you are in the air, that you're not on the ground, your Z gravity is increasing. That downward force is increasing, okay? Now, we're just simply catching on the floor right here. So whenever you're falling, all this is doing right here is this is just catching you and it's putting you on the floor. So now this +1, I noticed that there was a small glitch where sometimes I would get stuck at, for example, 0.2 or 0.4, and then I wouldn't be able to jump. So this is just a small little patch, this little +1 here. That's why I put that there. So whenever you have collided with the ground with your Z floor, or if you've overshot and gone through it, your Z is going to be equal to your Z floor, so you're going to snap to the ground. Your Z gravity, and remember that's the one that changes, or your Z downforce, would be another good term for this, is going to be 0, so you're not applying downforce anymore. And then your Z jump is equal to false because you're no longer jumping. So that, for a lot of you, I'm sure is can possibly be a little bit overwhelming and hard to try and understand. Like I said, feel free to comment and ask me questions. I'm more than happy to answer anything that I can. This is a more difficult subject. All we're doing here in the draw event, we are drawing the player's shadow underneath the player, and then we're drawing the player. Now, here's where the illusion of 3D comes into play. Because, if you notice in our project file, even though GameMaker only operates on the X and Y axis, it appears that there's a third axis coming into play. Now I'll let you in on the secret if you haven't figured it out already. We're just simply drawing the player on the Y axis based on what the Z is. So all we're doing here is we're drawing normally on the X, but then we're just subtracting, and remember, the Y is flipped since your origin is at your top left-hand corner, 0, 0, since GameMaker is in the bottom right-hand quadrant. So we're just simply subtracting or going up on the Y-axis by whatever your Z is. And then your shadow is simply updating based upon where the floor is, because the shadow is obviously going to be cast on the floor. This is more of a... This is simply to communicate to you and to show you if you're having bugs. This is just to show you, that's that little top in the top left-hand corner. That's showing you exactly what your player's Z is and exactly what the Z floor is. That's more for debugging purposes. You don't have to do this, obviously. Now, whenever we're going to WASD movement, let me just try to explain this. So what we're doing here is we're saying whenever key down, so whenever you're holding down A, we want to move left, okay? But first we're creating this variable, inst left, which stands for instance left, and this equals no one right now. Although, if there is X, so to the left of your X, so on your X, if your speed, and let's go back and look at our speed, so 1. So if there is to the left by 1 pixel the block pair, then that is now your instance left. So what we're doing here is we're essentially calling on this, and then we're checking to see what its Z is compared to your Z. So if the instance placed to the left, so if not a block to the left, or if instance left's Z is less than your Z, then we're going to be able to move left. So don't think of it as much as actually jumping like we would with a normal 2D platformer. If you guys checked out my how to make a Terraria-like game tutorial series, you'll kind of see how this is extremely different, or if you've just done a platformer in general. So what this is actually doing is it's going more based off of an allowance. So we are only allowing ourselves to move left whenever we're whenever we're pressing A, whenever either there's no block there, or whenever we are higher than the block, whenever our Z, or whenever the instance Z is less than your Z, so whenever you are above it. So the only ways that you're able to move left by pushing A is if there's no block, or if there's a block and you're above it. And that's essentially the same logic that we are using with all 4 directions here. But we're just changing some of the variable names. This isn't super important. This is more of just an emergency game, and I was planning on putting in full screen. And then this, we kind of already went over this. Basically, you hit space if you're on the ground, and your jumping equals true, and then that triggers this series of events right here, okay? And then whenever we are colliding with the block, now this is another reason that I didn't do it with a physics collision, is because if you were to do this with a physics collision, then you might run into the problem where the physics collisions are overriding everything that you've written, and you're not able to collide with it even if you're above it. And that's not what we want. So what we're saying here is if you're on top of a block, so inst below, so we have inst up, down, left, right, and below. So inst below equals inst place, and that's going to be at your X and Y value. And so all that we're saying is whenever you're on top of a block, your Z floor equals the instance's Z. And I'll come back to this in a second, but I'll kind of show you an example. So this is 16, Z16, because it's 16 tall. So all that's doing is it's saying if you're colliding with it, which obviously means that you're above it, otherwise, like I said, we did these allowances here. So the only way that you're able to move on top of it is, or excuse me, move inside of it is if you're on top of it. And if you're on top of it, then we're just going to update the Z floor. And then if you'll remember, over here, we update the Z floor if you're not colliding at all. So, and right here we're doing that. So if you're not on top of any blocks. And again, this is a little bit of a complicated subject here. I even am having a little bit of trouble entirely wrapping my head around it. I think I have a pretty solid understanding, but I've never really been the best at math, and so this is definitely a lot more of a challenging one for me. Let me see. Yes, we have the O block there. Okay, so all that we're doing here in these blocks is we're just setting the height manually. So setting this to 16, and then yeah, this is still just inherited from that, which is inherited from this. So ignore this because we already have it in the non-static parent. Which I guess technically, yeah, I won't get into that. Now in the O block 32, we're just simply setting this to 32. So I've just simply placed these in the room as such. And ladies and gentlemen, that is just about all there is to it. So overall, it's maybe not as complex as it seems, but it's definitely not. If you're not familiar with Game Maker, you would think something like this might be easy. If you've ever dabbled with it, you know it's very challenging to pull off. But hopefully that kind of gives you a better understanding of the Z-axis, 2.5D jumping, or top-down jumping, whatever you'd like to call it. Like I said, feel free to talk to me in the comments if you have any questions or anything like that. I will try and answer as many people as I can. And I'm all about building a community, trying to help people learn, just trying to pass on some of the knowledge that I have. But anyways, guys, if you'd like to see more of this, maybe a more in-depth look at the Z-axis, or if you have any other suggestions for any tutorials, please feel free to comment below and give any suggestions, and I will try to respond to as many people as I can. But in the meantime, I will see you in the next video.